Good evening. This is Andrew here at Atomo, looking at Saturday, October 29th, soon to be Saturday or Sunday, October 30th. By the time I finish this, another late one here. Just going over notes for today. Looks like a little bit of war on aluminium. So here in the Netherlands, the looks like the Eldel plant has filed for bankruptcy. So that means some metals capacity coming offline, and definitely we need aluminium for green energy projects. So this is an interesting development to see some of these industries come offline. As you're, this is interesting. You do this war on energy, and we have the higher density forms of energy, which tends to pollute. Does it contribute to climate change? Well, there's ways of the technological advents that we have now that we can, mitigate these problems, especially if we put a lot of environmental controls in, especially Canada here, EU. So to completely take this energy offline, here's the effects that's going to happen. Of course, then these industries will then go to more. Here's the joke. They're going to joke, not a joke. I don't know. Then they go to China. The problem with this is when we start to play around with our heavy industries, then there's a lot of hesitancy to fund these. It takes a lot of finances to get these projects up and running, hundreds of millions, if not billions of dollars to build these complexes, and then to play around with policy so that you know, investors don't want to invest in these. And let's not get into ESGs, which is another thing that's happening. Aluminium, yeah, so we got a hit in Netherlands. There is an aluminium plant in Zaporozhye in Ukraine, and there was some uh, shelling or bombing happening there. Not a lot. I had to check on the open source interactive maps showing some of the events that are happening in Ukraine. Zaporozhye is not under Russian control. It's like still under Ukrainian control. So what's going to happen is some of these industrial complexes are used as staging grounds for military operations. When that happens, they become a fair game target for either side to attack. So, of course, then that has an impact of, once you start hitting heavy industry, then they may have to shut down, move people out of there, and this is more productive capacity that is taken off world markets, and that has downstream effects. Definitely, the costs push inflation. Great way to increase prices. Just take the commodities off the market. A little bit of blame game happening here. Moving on to Nord Stream. Back to our energy. Russia is making some claims that the British Navy personnel blew up the gas pipelines. So I'll have to look for some evidence from Russia on that. They might bring something to the United Nations. And then we'll have to see how that plays out. And continuing with energy and security, if we go over to Saudi Arabia, uh, NBC is reporting that the Biden administration is considering the possibility of reducing arms supply to the kingdom. Well, now we're getting some tit for tat coming up. Saudi Arabia, like they might join into BRICS, and start to flip the finger to the USA. We don't need you anymore. Uh, Possibly that, the war on this energy from the Davos crowd in Europe then just means that these other folk are going to find more stable markets for their products. Business. They want a stable market to sell into. China and Russia are going to give them that stable market. And of course, there are the unfriendly countries, and they're not going to sell energy to them. United States, Canada being a couple of those. So the countries in the global south that are joining BRICS will get energy discounts from what we get. So what happens here, if as these countries get energy discounts, they can then build their industrial capacity, and they're not hamstrung by things like ESG guidelines, environmental, social, and governance. ESGs are just a type of social credit score for industries or corporations. And if they fail on the ESG scores, then what happens is they don't get favorable funding, especially with ESG style funding mechanisms that are in the market. Now, there is some reports that we might get, or it actually is in progress, where some legislators in the USA are starting to push back on ESGs. ESGs just a form of communism. You have just a Politburo that tells you what the rules are, and if you don't fall in line with those rules, then your organization can be cut out of funding, could potentially be unbanked, which is part of what's happening is to get the banks to ratchet down the ESGs because it's basically you're just going to detonate your economy by bringing those into play. You won't be able to compete with the other countries that don't care about, okay, we're just going to get energy. We want to build our industrial capacity. Next thing you know it, the collective West gets so far behind that Russia with their energy, China with, the offshoring of US industrial capacity. And we might even see now is as Europe loses industrial capacity, well, where are those industries going to go? The United States is hoping pick me. But if you have a bunch of behind the scenes Eurotrash technocrats embedded in the US government and with the Biden administration, especially, then that's really an unsafe place to put money for developing these industries or energy sources. So what do you have left? Well, you have China and Russia. That just means they get the leg up in more industrial capacity. They can build better things. Science and technology comes from that. And if they can liberalize a bit more, then they can attract the talent needed to really ramp that up. And I know from some friends that I have, Russia is behind on management capabilities. So when we think about Western management, it's actually quite good. It's well sought after in a lot of countries to make things more efficient and effective. And a colleague that I have that goes around the world to places looks at Russia and it's like, no, Russia just something about it that with the way that the people work there, they just don't get it yet. Possibly because what happens is your progressive type people, if they go too far over to the left, then become difficult to use in your businesses, though they tend to be highly creative, which creates innovation. So you have to take a look at California and Silicon Valley for that. So you see with what happens with those Silicon Valley companies over the couple of decades, then that progressive type sentiment then just grows to a point where it becomes difficult to manage. It actually becomes quite costly when the entitlement starts to fall in. But with Russia, you have a lot of traditional, we were to say, conservative type energy, doesn't have that high innovation streak. So it tends to be tell me what to do and I'll do it. And I'll do it well, but you need to tell me what to do. So there's none of that creative power. China's different though. They do actually do have that creative capacity, especially in areas where it's not quite pressed down. So corporations can tend to rise in China, but then they get pressed down at a certain size. Take Jack Ma and Ant, for example. We don't see Jack Ma running around shooting his mouth off anymore. Uh, that news is no longer there. So moving on. Yeah, the grain deal. So we had the incident in Sevastopol and Crimea today, where there was attacks on the port, which means the civilian bulk carriers taking the food. I talked about this yesterday. There's the blockades, or the not no, not a blockade. Let's say more of a creating some traffic jams in the Bosphorus area. So the movement through Turkey of the shipping gets uh, gummed up. There's ways of doing that because of the treaty regulations in that area. So you can kind of play paper cuts with ships by putting too much shipping traffic in that area, and that stops this operation. So yeah, Russia's sending grains out. Problem with that? Well, it's great that you're trying to send stuff out to uh, where countries are having food security problems, but then, you know, again, collective West messing around with that. Yeah. There was a report that came out looking at the something called the, let's see here, checking my notes about conference here, Valdai Discussion Club. So I haven't had a chance to look at the translated videos of this. Let me just get a little more light back on me there. It's late here. So, one China policy coming from Putin, basically saying, yep, Taiwan belongs to China. And asked, why did that old woman go to Taiwan, referencing how House Speaker Nancy Pelosi went out to Taiwan? Well, really, why she went out is because the Biden administration are just a bunch of vandals at this point. They're going around trying to stoke up any sort of conflict. When you have empire in decay, uh, you start to see all these destabilizing effects. Let's take ideologies, gender ideologies. Maybe there's that saying that when Rome was falling and they were being attacked by the Gauls, or, you might have to correct me on this one, that the Senate was just debating what gender the angels were. So empire in decline when that starts to happen, which means that just opens to the your empire getting virused. And we do have, with Elon Musk getting into Twitter, looking to create a place for us to have conversations like this and to start to help people understand and navigate these conversations, and knowing that, while we want people to choose the life they want to choose, we still have to transact with each other. We want to transact with each other in a way that the social fabric is maintained. Progressives want to move things forward in a new direction, conservatives tend to make sure that old traditional um, ways of being are still in place so that the fabric doesn't get torn too much. You got too much on the conservative side, there's no longer um, developments, innovation. Too much on the progressive side, too much innovation, too much change. Then there's no underlying structure in which we can, build value on top of. Both sides need to be at some sort of steady state in order for us to enjoy the benefits of what both bring. So you have Russia really getting chummy with Xi Jinping. She just, I believe, has another 5 year term, making him a 15-year president. Maybe that's what you call a lifer. Yeah, you never know. If he gets another 5 years after this, then no, he's probably surpassed even Mao territory. So now that he has his 5 years, he can move forward with some new plans. So you might see some gloves coming off from the China side, and with Russian energy, they're looking at a kind of a match made in heaven. Just but one of the things that they need is they'll probably look to get help from Western management. So you'll probably see reports about ex-military people going and training Chinese military folk on doing certain things, get paid quite a lot of money to do that. Uh, it's getting called out, but not a lot of media attention. I don't have any specific stories here about that. Just jumping across to other things coming in, I got some notes here on. I don't know much about the Iraqi parliament, but there's some kerfuffle in the parliament because there's an Iranian-based group in the parliament, and there was some mudslinging leading to some attacks going on. Not sure if this is something that's going to perpetuate anymore, but again, it's Iraq has oil and energy. There might be something going on here, especially now that the USA completely has their eye off the ball with the Middle East. And then we're talking about, okay, well, now industries are moving. So moving on over to Germany, BASF, world's largest chemical producer, is downsizing permanently in Europe. Again, once energy costs a lot of money, it's not the political class that's going to take the hit for it. It's the people who need a place to go to work. And Germany was a great place to do that. Good products, smart people, great engineering, cheap energy. Well, by virtue of Russian gas, because they shut off a lot of their nuclear power. But once we take that away, then the industry has no need to be there anymore. They'll go someplace else. So they're taking looks like a $10 billion plastics engineering facility in China. It looks like they're going to increase that. And then I believe Tesla has backed out of their gigafactory in Germany, or not expanding it. So again, piling it on, just for the German folk out there. Better start thinking about who you want in government, because if you want the Greens in there, they're just going to eviscerate, keep eviscerating. You want the Davos crew in there, they'll keep eviscerating until there's nothing left, and then they'll seek absolute total control, possibly with some help with the UK now that the UK has a Davos friendly regime in place, which means they can connect up. I mentioned the other video, they'll connect up their banking systems and try to give it a go, or run the clock longer to see if they can run the Fed down. With the Fed rate bringing rates up pretty high, pretty fast, the banking system in the U.S. is isolated because they're on SOFR, the secure overnight funding rate, which broke from LIBOR. LIBOR is a European banking system. lending rate, so they can lend between the banks. The U.S. banks were connected to that. They had to go based on LIBOR rates. So if the US banks weren't doing something that the European banks wanted them to do, they could punish them by increasing the interbank lending rates. So they broke from that back a few years ago. And so SOFR actually is a market type rate. LIBOR is not. LIBOR is just a bunch of people get together, they have a phone call, they blast out, they say, oh, I want 3% for today or 4.5%. They knock out, I think, the four highest, four lowest, take the average of the remainders. But because it is a phone call and you can do back office dealings before they get onto that call, and then if the American banks are all coming hat in hand, they can place the call and they can kick up the rates. Nukes, but not the bad. Well, depends on how you want to look at this. But the Romania is going to build a modular nuclear reactor in Europe. It's a smaller scale, so it's U.S. government $14 million grant to Nuclear Electrica. It looks like a state-owned group within Romania for 462 megawatt per year reactor complex to replace coal power plant. So you're going to see a lot of this, a lot of the nuclear energy coming back. It comes with a caveat though. So this is where no financial advice, no legal advice, no election fornication advice here. But taking a look at whoever can produce nuclear fuel is going to, in the years to come, possibly get into a new bullish market. Poland getting a new plant from Westinghouse Electric. So they're having a conversation. 6 AP1000 reactors from Westinghouse. Have to do some checks on that reactor, because with any nuclear reactor, there is a chance to do other stuff having to deal with weapons, but I'm not sure if this reactor type allows that. Some do, some don't. And of course, Finland looking to possibly park some. Now we're on the other side, nuclear weapons. Looking to park some, and it looks like gravity bombs at this point. I don't think ballistic missiles or any sort of ballistic missile complexes at this point. That's coming from New York Post. US accelerates plan to send upgraded nuclear weapons to Europe. I think it's airdrop bombs. Yeah, but still, Finland, Sweden submitted their application to join NATO. Now they want to get the bomb. Yeah, we need to talk more about peace around here. Nuclear escalation doesn't bode well. Part of why Elon said he wanted to get Twitter. He was twitching and twerping or whatever around, whether he wanted it or didn't want it. Then I think he made, seeing what's happening in the world, I think he's accelerating him. I do believe that Elon does care about humanity, and money is money. The better is just to make sure that we have a path forward for a conversation and just not doing stupid stuff that's going to get us wiped off the planet. And for all those climate change and people crying about it, you know what? If we're gone, the planet will still be here. It will do its thing. It's going to be here for a few billion years more until the sun burns out and dies. But just we're just here. We're just a speck of time as far as we're here. Best thing we could do is get along, figure out how to best manage our energy so we can get off this rock and find some other rocks uh, before it's too late. What we don't know is the great filter in front of us or is a great filter behind us. Big questions here. Have a happy Sunday.